I think issue with Vosh at this point could be summarized as misogyny bad, even if turf suck, but misogyny bad too. That's basically my like you could summarize my position on Vosh about that. That's about all that I really have to say about that. Like it doesn't really particularly matter how vile the woman is. I just don't feel like it's acceptable to engage in misogynistic slurs and go down that route with them. I mean, we can always find something objectionable about the critique without going there. That's just not like. First of all, it's optically bad, and I know that I don't give a shit about it, but Voss sure as fuck does. I stopped giving a fuck about things like reputation a long fucking time ago because it was just yeah, I was a kid, man. I mean, like I was one of the kids that was already there was like nothing I could have fucking done to make them like me, so I just started experimenting. You know what I mean? It was just like it. They didn't like me, and so it became very difficult to believe things like growing up and maturity had anything to do with making peace with this, the established order. It just didn't really resonate. And you grew up into this position where it was like it was perfectly acceptable to still be at war with the world well into your fucking 40s and 50s, 60s, into your grave, man. Like it just didn't, you know it didn't really matter. Maturity and growing up have nothing to do with actually making peace with the established order. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think that they really have anything to do with each other. So you're looking at for me, it was just, I was such an outcast growing up that it was just like, you enter the real world and you enter the space in there, and it's like, oh, well, this microcosm that I was in is just like a lot reflective of the larger macrocosm. Sadly, people fucking suck everywhere you go, it seems, and you get that mentality eventually, it hits you, and it's just like, I don't like I didn't fit in. I didn't fit in here on this particular platform. I've got friends on other platforms. YouTube is basically trying to tell me how much how terrible I am, and it's just like, what, like, it's remarkable too because like the TikTok crowd with the few things that I've said on there has been pretty well received, and I'm not even well suited for TikTok as a platform because it's just like I'm part of an older generation that's had the internet since like '99. Like the '90s even, who's been using it that long, and you go on there and you're having this experience where you're communicating with them, but you're just trying to be a little bit of an influencer. But you're like, like I went on, and like the only thing that I really had to say to them was just basically, I feel sorry for you kids that used to be able to read like long books, and also you adults that can't read, anymore because you've been addicted to these videos. For so long that you haven't been able to like pick up a book. And I was just holding like a book like this up, and I was like, we're gonna need people that know how to manage the machines going forward. How are you gonna learn about even them if you're not willing to pick up a goddamn book and read? Or even just read the fucking PDFs of them or something. And it's like people have gotten addicted to this stuff. They've gotten addicted to the noise. They've gotten addicted to the videos, the video formatting, and it kind of seems to me that that's what everybody's gotten spoiled on it to the point in which they haven't been able to actually read in so long. And we know that our brain reshapes itself to reinforce what we spend our time doing, which is part of the reason why I became an evangelist for RSS technology, because it was like, I'm on here, but I have RSS in my feeds, so like I get a steady stream of articles, to me from my RSS script, and so it's like Daily Kos is putting up, and I know that that's a maligned blog, because I've spent enough time debating people, but fuck, not to me. Ukraine update: Russia suffered a massive defeat, and now they're venting their anger on one small city. So apparently, the Ukrainians have managed to retake, the Kharkiv, uh, region for a huge part. So that we have had a massive liberation of that particular area by the Ukrainian forces, and go Ukraine, go. supportive of them because it just seems to me that it's like you've got autocracy via rule by Putin versus admittedly, it's not really the best form of government that I could think of, but a liberal democracy that will. But we live under a liberal democracy here in the United States, and it's not the best, but it could be considerably worse. You know what I mean? Like that's how I feel about it. Like I know that most Americans would probably consider that a pretty cringe take on America, but it's basically how I feel. There's this sense of America isn't all bad, but it is bad in a lot of ways. And all of that. Like the reason why I come down on the side of Ukraine is that in essence, my rooting for them is about the idea that I think that if I'm pushed into as this situation like where the only choices that I can make are between these two parties, right? So there's only two of them, and one of them is at least a democracy, and the other is just a complete maybe Russia thinks of itself as a democracy, but it's a very decayed democracy. Like I don't even know if elections are legitimate in Russia, really. I really don't. I don't know that they're holding that they're holding legitimate elections, or they're just sham elections over there. I mean, fuck if I know, what's going on as far as that's concerned. I mean, it really, but Putin seems to rule with a pretty iron fist, and he's a tyrannical control over. Like they punish dissidents. Dissidents against the guy is scarcely even tolerated in that country. People that rise up against him seem to get punished for it vindictively. There's no real grounds for dissidents at all, it seems, under the Russian system, and that doesn't really seem to, when you're looking at that versus the potential, like Ukraine, what you kind of come to is at least Ukraine isn't gonna necessarily kill somebody or disappear them because they expressed an opinion that was to the contrast of Zelensky's government. Like that's just not the situation there today, and it's like because of that and because of that realization, it's like liberal democracy isn't like the best system humanly possible. Like my partner would pretty much prefer democratic centralism and a pretty I guess you could say like she wants a system that does more for people to she's a socialist, so she wants basically more for um the common man, basically. That's how I would summarize it. Like she's not really looking for to further the interest of the already well to do. She wants more for people like me, you know and like when I look at this situation, though, it's like it's either that or it's Russian autocracy. So it's like those are the only two options that we have, and we have to make our choices, unfortunately, based on the reality that we live in, and not as compared to some hypothetical like unobtainium that doesn't really exist, or some hypothetical like unicorn poop or something that it just isn't, unicorn blood, that it just isn't a reality or a thing, and doesn't exist at all. I mean, like we Americans are really bad about that too. Like they're like, no, I want this hypothetical system that is perfect compared to that. Like I want a world without drugs, rather than to be reasonable about drugs and realize that people are always going to take them, and that what we really should be doing is trying to reduce the harm that happens to the people affected. We don't go for solutions like that in the United States because we've got this kind of blinded by two like I guess you could say like blinded by this absolutism that is like either black or white. Like I mean, what I would say that is like one of the biggest proofs of this is that like I'm pro-choice, like well not exactly pro-choice, but I'm for a woman's right to terminate an unwanted pregnancy for any reason of her choosing. Like I'm not my business, as far as that stuff's concerned. But what I find really astonishing is that I would not necessarily be opposed to doing something that would make a woman less likely to opt into making that choice in particular, out of generosity to, to make those options less appealing. And, we live in a country that can do that. And that's what I find so disgusting about the whole issue, which is that we know the two reasons why women choose it. The two biggest ones are usually lack of ability to pay for a child and wanting to continue their education and feeling like the child would prevent them from, doing that and completing their education. Those are the two biggest motivators that we see in the Gutman research about why they actually choose it. Why is it that we had to attack Roe versus Wade, to deal with this problem when it would have been so much better to just address those two causes that caused them to opt into it than it would be to, address Roe versus Wade and take it out. And the thing that really kind of pissed me off is that the reason why doctors really did start turning their eyes and against and away ultimately from the being against abortion because they were originally was because their patients would just literally like have somebody stick a coat hanger up there and try to poke at it so that it punctures it and the child ends up dead. But of course you end up with these infections that you have these internalized bleeding and it can get infected in there, and these patients would come in with these infections and everything after it had done catastrophic damage to them, and either nearly died or were catastrophically injured by the fact that they did this just to get rid of the baby. And it was like women who are in a situation like that can get quite desperate. And one thing we do know is that when people get really, really deprived and desperate, out of options, they can take some pretty drastic actions. And this pattern of that statement that happens over and over and over and over again whenever somebody feels like they're a cornered cat, and it's like that's what happened in that situation. We doctors changed their minds after that and started pushing for Roe versus Wade, which admittedly had, I guess you could say, from the analytical side, I know that there are a lot of people that are pro-choice that are kind of picking at it and pointing out that it's been badly written in the first place and should be basically, codified into law, in a much more coherent fashion than the way that it was originally. And I wouldn't be against that, getting a good thing. But like the reason why I'm saying the things that I am is that I'm trying to criticize the mythical pro life cause. I would say that they've been blinded by the all-consuming obsession with, overturning Roe versus Wade, which has blinded them to the reality that, like, how should we put this? There was a time in America before Roe, and abortions were happening even when it wasn't legal, which means that, in effect, Roe versus Wade didn't create abortions; it just made abortions more safe, and that's all that it really did. And that means that if you go for something like ending Roe versus Wade, and you get there up on your platform and you say like, we are a generation that's going to end abortion in America. No, you aren't. Abortion will go on whether it's legal or illegal, whether people are punished for it, and no matter how draconian and restrictive the states are in tracking people down, and no matter how how determined they are to try to crack down on interstate travel for these issues. It's going to happen, and it can be predicted that it will happen no matter what. And come hell or high water, as far as all that stuff is concerned, and this is not hard to really ultimately fundamentally predict. Is going to be the way that things happen as far as that issue is concerned. And it's disgusting in a lot of ways because it means less women make it, based, which means less options for all the guys that are single and looking, and I just think that ultimately, like, what my position is not like we should do anything that takes away a woman's choices. Like we shouldn't be limiting her options. So what we should be doing instead is to try to address the underlying causes that are you know driving abortion in the first place. If you can do something about those things, you'll get a reduction in rates of abortion, and that's the most reasonable thing to suggest. But it's contrasted with this idea of a literal perfect to them, which is banning abortions. And that's the problem in a lot of ways with America. America would rather go for that option than do something reasonable about the issue. In particular, if you wanted to know, like, one of the things that I think that very vocally in support of, and have been for a while, screaming from the wilderness about, that I support, it was Colorado's free IUD program. They started giving people free IUDs, and it was like, that just makes so much sense to me, because it was like, this is a system that would actually address the underlying cause in a big way, and then teen pregnancy rates and abortions would plummet in Colorado, as they did, shortly after this policy was enacted. But it wasn't literally perfect, so it wasn't good enough for a lot of those people. I think that, you know, certainly we can allow a woman to have an abortion, but maybe it isn't a bad thing to pursue reducing abortions rather than outright eliminating them. And I think that those are programs that are far more reasonable and far more likely to actually succeed in their efforts. I mean, we have articles now that they're very recent, going back to 2019, that say everything about this stuff. I don't know what it's at now. I don't have exactly the 2022 information about it, but Jennifer Brown wrote for the Colorado Sun that Colorado's abortion rates were declining, and free IUDs and easier access to the pills were the reason that it was happening, in the state. And so it was like, this is the kind of policy I would like to see happen about the whole thing. It's what I think is the most reasonable and articulate, position that you could fucking take on it. And yet, we get this whole that's socialism kind of objection to it, but it's like, if you people really cared about, these women, that you really cared about the abortions that were happening, you would embrace policies like this. I mean, it's really kind of rather shameful how these people, like, they claim to care about the unborn so much that they would call somebody like me, who has supported the pro-choice cause, evil and awful for it, and compare me to Hitler and the Holocaust and all that stuff, when they won't even do, like, one of the most basic and reasonable policies, because there's this hypothetical perfect that's out there, that they're transfixed on and unable to see something like this. And that's my country in a big way, in a huge way, in this place. And I don't know. I just, yeah. There's all that stuff, but yeah, America is a little bit messed up in a lot of ways.